And we're back here on the MCU Rewatch Reviews series, today talking about Captain America, the Winter Soldier, as we kind of approach this part of the MCU in Phase 2 specifically, where the movies, in my opinion, get gradually better and better and better, and this one being among my favorites of all time, not just of the MCU, of course. So, as always, we're bringing in Chris Mueller, the doc, the master, the expert in all things Marvel. Chris, welcome back to the show.
Thanks.
Am I alone here in feeling that The Winter Soldier is one of the best movies in the MCU Phase 2 or not?
No, you're not alone. I definitely rank this movie really high up on the list for a lot of reasons.
It's such a great movie, and the thing is that we talked about the first Captain America movie a couple of weeks ago. That's a very good movie in its own right as well. We talked a lot about that film, but I feel like the Winter Soldier movie is so different in various ways. And I know, again, it's different because the first movie kind of has the task of introducing all these characters, this person, that person, and not just the fact that this movie takes place present day, but also the fact that there's so many swerves, which we'll get to in a wrestling term with all the swerves that take place in the latter half of the movie. It's just so different than anything else in the MCU. And it's so rare, too, because, we've talked about Iron Man before, and I think we did agree the first Iron Man movie is easily the best one of that trilogy, right?
Oh, yeah, for sure.
100%. So it's very rare, not just in the MCU, but really movies in general, that you have a movie that's as good, if not better, than the original with the sequels. But I think, we'll get to it right now, but do you think this might just be better than the original Captain America, the first Avenger movie?
In a lot of ways, you could objectively say that it's better for certain reasons, but I also feel like they're almost two completely different movies because of the time jump. So it would be unfair, in my opinion, to compare them. I'd almost rather compare this one to Civil War
Makes
because
sense,
those
yeah.
two
Yeah.
are both modern, whereas the first one's more of a period piece, so they were going for a whole different feel.
Mm-hmm.
But I definitely think, as far as like the Captain America trilogy, Winter Soldier might edge out the first one.
Yeah, it's pretty good. Again, it's definitely debatable. I could see people picking that first movie just because it is so great. Like you said, it is a period piece and just very good for various reasons, as is this one for completely different reasons. But still a great film nonetheless. One of my favorite parts of the movie comes at the very beginning when they're introducing for the very first time Falcon, a.k.a. Sam Wilson, where they're doing the laps. And he says, "On your left," and of course that becomes a running gag throughout, not just this movie, but they bring it back in Endgame years later, so I thought that was really cool. You know the whole story, I'm sure you do, but the story about how when he's giving Steve Rogers the list, Sam is, of all the things that he should catch up on, and he included like some band that they end up bringing back at the end of the movie. You know how like it says like Nirvana on it, Star Wars I think is on there, that I guess they made, and I completely forgot about this until I looked it up when I saw the movie again the other day, that they made a different list for each like country that the movie came out in. I thought that was amazing.
Oh, I remember hearing something about that, and that was, just their way of kind of making it a little more accessible. But yeah, like I think Marvin Gaye, the Trouble Man soundtrack, is what he tells them to listen to.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
I just love how he has Star Wars and Star Trek together. It's like Star Wars / Trek.
yeah. Thinking it might be the same thing. I thought that was cool. I know on like one of the other lists, I think the one that may have come out in England or whatever, like the Beatles is on there. Like you said, to make it a bit more accessible and relatable to people depending on where you're watching it. I don't know what they had for other countries, but I thought that was so cool. Like to release 350 different versions of the same movie for literally like a 2-second scene. I think that is the attention to detail was great. But what are your thoughts on the introduction of Anthony Mackie as Sam Wilson / Falcon, not only in the scene but the introduction of his character in this movie?
Well, I like Anthony Mackie as an actor. I've actually I liked him before this movie, so when I heard he was in this one, I was really excited, and I thought they did a good job kind of making it like a very casual thing where, like he's not in the military anymore. He's just some guy that Steve meets working out, but he ends up being, the one guy who he goes to for help later. But yeah, I felt like they did a good job establishing him early on as like a good, trustworthy guy. He's volunteering at the veterans place and all this other stuff to just kind of tell you, like, this is a guy that Cap can rely on.
Yeah, he's a good dude, and they do a great job of kind of giving you reasons to care about the character. We see quite a bit of him in the movie, which is great. It's not like we see him at the beginning, then he comes back at the end to save the day or whatever. He's very much throughout this movie, which is cool. So in addition to Sam Wilson, we also see quite a bit of Black Widow in this movie, too. We had seen previously, of course, in Iron Man 2 was her debut. We saw more of her in The Avengers. But this is kind of like a Captain America, Black Widow movie in many ways. What were your thoughts on the increased presence of Black Widow in Winter Soldier?
I liked it. I thought it was good that they gave her more to do, and she was pretty much the one who was kind of responsible for them succeeding in a lot of ways. She's the one who kind of taught him how to stay hidden in public real quick, and she's the one who's got all the computer skills, and really she feels like a very important character in this and not just some side character. And that's what I really liked about it.
In addition to her just not being given more to do, like you said, which is great, they also give a lot of background hints as to what kind of preceded, her coming into the MCU, kind of hinting at her background and how dark it may be, killing people. They do mention at the end of the movie when what's his name? The main bad, Alexander Pierce, Robert Redford. He kind of makes a note when she's going through, releasing the documents or whatever, kind of revealing that S.H.I.E.L.D. is a part of Hydra and whatnot. He says, if you do that, then your past will become public. And are you ready for that? And then she says, are you? So they kind of turn the question on him. They don't really shine any more light on what that past may include. And obviously they go into more detail about that in Ultron with her past and what it may include. I assume we get a lot more details on that in the upcoming Black Widow movie. But it was really cool to not just see her do a lot more in this movie and to see her factor into the finish, so to speak, in the ending, but also to kind of get to know a bit more about her and what she's about and her background and whatnot, which is cool. Did you know that we got a GSP cameo in the movie, too? George St. Pierre fighting Captain America early on the boat?
Oh, yeah. That was, anyone who knows who that guy is definitely recognized him.
Yeah, definitely. I
thought it was funny that they would bring him in just to get his butt kicked.
I know, just for a minute, too. We don't see him again. I guess he's shown getting interviewed, real quickly later on in the movie. But did you think that was a good use of GSP?
They wanted somebody who looked like a realistic badass, and he fits the bill. So, yeah, but, he's not an actor, so I wouldn't have expected them to give him much more to do than just throw fists.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. They do make note, that is Nick Fury, he's in a lot in this movie as well. We see him quite a bit in Avengers. That's kind of his big movie. We see him a lot in Iron Man 2. He makes an appearance at the end of Iron Man 1. We see him in, what was the other one? The first Captain America movie at the very end. So we see a bit of Nick Fury in various movies, including this one, of course. Again, giving more background history on his character a little bit. And the whole idea of the movie is trust. S.H.I.E.L.D. Trusting that there's no Hydra members in their, group, whatever, and there obviously is. But also, trust within Captain America becoming friends with Black Widow, Nick Fury having to trust Captain America, and so on and so forth. He even says, last time I trusted someone, I lost an eye. And of course, we don't find out the origin of why or how he lost that eye until Captain Marvel many years later. But did you have any early speculation on what may have caused him to lose his eye in this movie when you were watching it? Or was it something that was hinted at in the comics by any chance?
I don't know how he lost the eye in the comics, and I just assumed it was a battle wound. So when that whole thing happened in Captain Marvel, I know a lot of people had a problem with that. I personally don't mind them making a joke out of that.
Mm-hmm.
I thought it got a laugh out of me. So, it doesn't bother me. But I've never really viewed him being, only having one eye as really, I know it's a big part of the character in the comics, but I don't care about it. So yeah. I thought it was kind of funny that they tied it in that way.
Yeah, they eventually, the plot hole, so to speak, that they kind of never really explained it until, I wonder if they went into that Captain Marvel movie knowing that he was going to be in it, thinking, okay, we'll finally pay off, offer this payoff for what caused him to lose his eye, because we have yet to explain it at any other movie prior to this point, so I appreciated that. But we do see the reunion.
What I was hoping they would do in this movie is, there's a thing with Nick Fury in the comics, where he takes some serum that basically stops him from aging. And so that's why he's still alive, even though he fought in World War II.
Nick Fury?
And, yeah.
Oh, interesting.
So I was hoping that was going to be something that they would actually bring in, and like maybe they would reveal that he was like a young soldier during Cap's time or something, and they never ended up using that, and I was a little disappointed. I was hoping that would come into this movie.
That would actually be quite perfect, I think, for Nick Fury, for Samuel L. Jackson's character, just because in the many movies that he's appeared in the MCU, the guy never looked like he's aged a day. I mean, Samuel L. Jackson in general does not look like he's aged at all. I mean, obviously he looks younger in Captain Marvel, but the guy is, 70 years old?
And ironically, that's the movie he looks the oldest, because when you see him fighting the one guy in the file room,
yeah,
it's like, come on, that's a 70-year-old man. You can't fool me with these, like, facial, special effects. That's clearly a guy who's in the last stage of his life, trying to have a good fight scene. Like, they should have gotten a stunt double for that.
I agree.
Just to make it look more convincing. Like, the oldest he's ever looked is when he was supposed to be young. It's crazy.
Yeah, that is weird. What is he now, 70-something? I'm not sure, but he's definitely in his 70s, and he doesn't look a day over 40. It's crazy. It's amazing,
Yeah, if you look back at some of his old movies, it's obvious that he has aged, but he's 71.
Wow.
So, I mean, obviously when he made this, he was only in his 60s, but
yeah,
I mean, he's clearly taken good care of himself, and the fact that he's had a shaved head for so long, I think, helps, because you're not really watching him go gray or lose his hair.
Mm-hmm.
It's kind of like with The Rock. It's kind of like The Rock. Mm-hmm. If The Rock grew everything out right now, he'd be balding and gray.
Yeah. No, and he looks great. He also is another one that hasn't aged in 10 years because he shaved his head when he came back to the company the first time, So he's another guy that probably in 20 years from now will not look like he's aged today, as long as he doesn't lose any muscle mass or whatever. But yeah, it's kind of crazy. But also in this movie, we see the reunion of Steve Rogers and Peggy Carter. Did I miss something, or did it kind of seem like it came out of nowhere? Because they were in one scene, and then the next scene, you just see him sitting bedside by Peggy Carter, who's like 90-something now. Just kind of came out of nowhere, and then we don't see her again. Now, I know she pops up again in Civil War, or I don't know if she's in the movie, but we hear that she dies, and they show her funeral. But was that scene as random to you as it was to me, or was there any sort of build-up to that scene and the reunion between the two?
So if I'm not mistaken, that scene was actually intended for the first one. That was going to be like the post-credit scene.
Oh, really?
I think they felt it was too depressing, and they just used it in this movie instead. So it may have even been shot when the first movie was being made. I'm not totally sure on that, but yeah, it was definitely originally meant for the first one, and I think they're like, we can't really end on such a sour note. Let's just end with him waking up in the future, and then we'll get to Peggy in the next movie. And it was obviously like a sad moment when you realize that she's got Alzheimer's or dementia or something that's affecting her memory, and then she thinks she's seeing him for the first time after all these years again, after they've already been having a conversation. It's one of the few moments in the MCU where I think it's a very real moment that a lot of people relate to, because a lot of people have somebody in their family who either has or is suffering from that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's interesting. It's one of those real things where you kind of watch these movies to distract you from the reality of certain situations, but it is nice in certain points where they do acknowledge the real life things that are happening with stuff like that. That it's a lot of people can have experienced, have gone through, will go through, whatever. I thought it was a good scene. It just kind of felt out of place because it wasn't like he thought in that moment, oh, she's still alive, I'll go see her. Like, I forgot what preceded that scene, but they just randomly show him at bedside with Peggy. Like, how did he know that she was still alive? Did he even think to go see her before that? Because this is 2014, and he's been in the present day since 2011, 2012. You know what I mean? So it just kind of seemed a little random, and then it may have been, like you said, originally planned for the first movie, which I never really thought of, but that would make sense. But I think...
The implication I got from it was that he goes on a regular basis, because it seemed like when they first start the scene, they're sort of having a conversation like they've had conversations already in this time period.
True.
And then she has the little lapse, but I kind of got the feeling that he'd been visiting her regularly at that point.
Yeah, that would actually make sense. They don't really show the beginning of when he sees her for the first time, but I guess that would make sense because they show like them middle in in the midst of a conversation, and that's when she forgets and they start over.
And I'm sure the first thing he did was look up to see if she was alive.
Was that one of the first things that he did?
I'm sure it was. I mean, when he wakes up and
they just didn't show it in the movie.
When he wakes up in the future and he the first thing he says is like, I missed a dance or I missed a date or something like that. It's like, so he's still thinking about her.
Did he say that at the end of the first movie? I don't remember that.
Yeah, I think he does, doesn't he?
I'm not sure.
I thought that was like his last line when somebody, I can't remember, but I think he mentions that like I was late for a dance or something like that.
Interesting.
Once he's out on the street. I don't know. I'd have to rewatch that scene.
Yeah, no, you're probably right. I know he does say it here. He said, you still owe me a dance, and of course they go back to that in Endgame, years later. But still, she says too, and it's interesting because they do kind of go through with this when she says, sometimes the best that we can do is start over. And that's exactly what he ends up doing. In Endgame, he doesn't really get to live his life, as she mentions, and they go back to that in Endgame. Again, the attention to detail and everything and how they kind of tie everything up in that great movie is amazing, but we'll get to that down the road. In this movie, as the main bad guy, we have Alexander Pierce, played by Robert Redford, of course, amazing actor, illustrious actor. What were your thoughts on how he kind of played the role as it's not apparent from the get-go that he's the main bad guy, but it kind of obviously becomes apparent the further the movie goes along.
Robert Redford's a great actor, so anytime he shows up in something, he's going to deliver. And I think this was one of his last movies, and then he retired, and then he got talked out of retirement for that cameo, and then
Oh, an Endgame, right?
Yeah, that's pretty much it. I don't think he's acting anymore. And, yeah, he's a great actor, so he did a good job. And I kind of knew from the get-go, I was like, oh, well, that's clearly going to be one of the villains, if not the villain. But as soon as they bring up, Brock Rumlow, I'm like, oh, well, that's Crossbones, so he's definitely turning bad at some point.
Yeah. Yeah, I thought he did a good job too, Rumlow.
Frank Grillo is a good actor, and I wish he'd had more to do.
Yeah, because they only show him in Civil War for maybe 5 or 10 minutes before he gets killed. So, it would be nice if they actually showed more of him, or if he was the main bad guy of, that movie or whatever. I'm not really sure. Maybe they'll bring him back in a show that takes place between Winter Soldier and Civil War to kind of, let us know what he was up to in between that time. But you kind of mentioned how you knew that Rumlow was Crossbow when you first saw the movie. Did you know from the get-go that S.H.I.E.L.D. would be infiltrated by Hydra? Was that something that was in the comics, or was that something made for the movies?
Well, I'm pretty sure that was in the comics, but I think one of the trailers kind of spoiled that.
Did it really? Huh.
I think it did, because I don't remember being surprised by it in the theater. It was kind of one of those things that I knew was coming, but the big reveal of Bucky was not a big reveal because the movie was called The Winter Soldier, and anyone who knows who the Winter Soldier is knew Bucky was back.
Yeah. Did they announce that Sebastian Stan was cast for the movie, or no at that time?
I'm sure he was probably already in press materials and stuff for it. So,
okay.
Yeah, I think it was probably obvious. But, they weren't keeping it a secret. They're like, this is the next big story. It's very important to Captain America. The Winter Soldier is a big part of his history. So, Yeah, it was obvious from the get-go that that's what was happening. And I actually, I knew very little about it, but I knew that the Winter Soldier was just a cool character in general, and that's why I was hoping he'd come to the movies, and I'm glad that they found an actor who was, good for the role, because I like Sebastian Stan as Bucky. I think he does a good job.
How do you think he does, how good of a job do you think he does of not just playing the Winter Soldier and the straightforward, ass-kicking machine as we saw in this movie, kind of the evolution of where we saw him in the first movie as Steve Rogers' friend, very humane, very relatable. How do you think he kind of plays both sides of that character?
Well, it's two good performances because he plays the character so different in each movie. In the first movie, he's Steve's best friend. He's always there for him. And in this, he's like a mindless soldier for the first half of the movie almost. Mm-hmm. And then as he's struggling to regain those memories, it's just a much different performance. But part of it is also because, like, he barely even looks the same as he did in the first movie because of the long hair. He has a little bit of a 5 o'clock shadow, and then he packed on a bunch of muscle.
Yeah.
So, like, it took a minute for me when I first saw the trailer to be like, oh, it actually is the same guy. Like, he's not nearly as skinny as he was in the first movie.
And he's got the mask on,
watch
too.
the first Captain America movie, like, he's in shape, but he's not huge.
No, yeah.
In this movie, he's pretty big.
Yeah. Yeah, he's in great shape. And he's got that face mask on, too. He was preparing for the pandemic before all of us.
I know, right?
At any point in this movie, did you think that Nick Fury was actually dead? I mean, knowing that the back history of the character, you kind of figured, okay, he'll come back. But, I mean, his death was kind of convincing when you first see it halfway through the movie, or at least it was to me when I was watching it as a casual fan at the time.
I will say that I wasn't surprised when he came back, but when he died, they did a pretty convincing job of, like, he was literally on the operating table, and then the doctor calls it, so it's like, oh, he was really dead. Like, yeah, I thought he was dead, but then when he came back, I'm like, yeah, that's not surprising.
Yeah.
So it's like, it's a typical Marvel thing where, like, very few people other than the expendable soldiers actually die in these movies.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, and with Nick Fury, it's like he's sort of the connective tissue to all of this, and they're not going to get rid of him right at the beginning of Phase 2.
Yeah, exactly. It would have been a little too soon for that. How great was that elevator scene that they go back to in Endgame years later? It's probably one of my favorite parts of the entire movie.
Oh, yeah, that's a great scene because the tension ramps up, and then he just, does anybody want to get out before we get started? Like, it's such a good scene. And then the fight choreography in that scene, even more so than what was on the boat, like, that scene let you know that this was just a much different type of action movie than the first one.
Mm-hmm.
Because the first one was all about, like, big set pieces and big weapons and just World War II in general. And in this, it's much more visceral. There's a lot of hand-to-hand combat, and it's just a much different feeling movie. And it really does feel more like a spy thriller than a typical big superhero blockbuster, even though it does have those helicarriers crashing at the end and there are big set pieces. It doesn't feel quite like it's as big of a story as some of the other Marvel movies, and I like that because it's just pretty much, Cap and Bucky, and then to an extent Falcon, Widow, and Fury's movie.
Yeah, no, definitely. It has a very different feel to it, as we alluded to earlier, which is why I enjoy it so much. But that scene alone is just so great. The choreography is great. It's amazing, like, to anyone watching it for the first time, not knowing the back history of the comics, what's about to happen with Rumlow turning heel, so to speak, in wrestling terms. I mean, they looked like bad guys. I mean, how can you watch this movie from the get-go and not think they were going to turn bad at some point? Everyone, not just Rumlow, but, like, even the other guys that were with him looked like bad guys. The guy with, like, the slick back hair, it's like, I mean, wouldn't it have been obvious to anyone watching this movie from the get-go?
I mean, maybe, but I felt like if anybody went into that not knowing who Rumlow was, I think the boat in the beginning did a good job of establishing him as not being a bad guy necessarily, because he actually, like, saves Cap at one point when he's parachuting in.
Yeah. He's like, he like shoots one guy or something.
And he's like, yeah, I look like you really needed my help.
Yeah.
But it's one of those things where Frank Grillo is probably the villain whenever you see him. So yeah, but I think he did a good enough job playing the role. Like, even when he gets in and he's like, hey, they found some evidence, should we get the tag team together? Like, he's still playing the part and doing a good job. But yeah, as soon as Cap spots his guy, as soon as Cap spots the one guy, like, with his hand on his taser,
yeah,
like, oh yeah, it's all over.
Yeah, I know. He has the hand on the taser, and then the other guy has, like, a bead of sweat going down his forehead. Again, it's just it's a great scene, and then, like you said, when Captain America goes, does anyone want to get out? And that's when it just ensues, and all chaos, it just breaks loose from there, which is great. Between, they have Pierce, they have Rumlow, Crossbow, whatever. They have already enough bad guys as it is. Did this movie really need the semi-return of Zola in computer form later on?
There were bigger plans for him. I don't even know. This might have been a deleted scene on the DVD. I don't own this movie on DVD, but there was something planned where before the bombs actually destroy the base, like his consciousness would download into some robot, and then that robot like took off from the base, and you see it running away. And I think that was something that they either like shot parts of, or maybe even finished the effects on it, and then they were like, you know what, that's maybe a little too ridiculous. Let's just tone that back. But yeah, I think in the comics, Zola, like his mind ends up inside a robot at some point.
Yeah, he kind of makes mention of that, and I'm surprised. I mean, that would have been a bit of a weird scene because it's not overly realistic or whatever. But like, I mean, at least it would have helped explain. I mean, he does a good job of explaining how he did it. You know, how Hydra kind of infiltrated S.H.I.E.L.D. and how it kind of started with him from the get-go. Do you know, I mean, from S.H.I.E.L.D.'s perspective, why would they let this guy in to work with them after he was working right alongside Red Skull for so long? Do you think that was a dumb decision on S.H.I.E.L.D.'s part?
Well, that's a common thing in movies is they take a prisoner and then they make that person work for them under heavy guard or whatever. But you know, the fact that S.H.I.E.L.D. had already infiltrated, or Hydra had already infiltrated S.H.I.E.L.D. meant that he was probably treated better than he should have been. But they do follow up with him in Agent Carter. He's in that show.
Oh, the character himself?
Yeah.
Oh, wow. Well, he's still alive, that is.
Yeah, and I think he may even help Agent Carter with something. Because I don't think he really cared about the Nazis. He just cared about like who he thought was going to win and sided with whoever was most powerful. But I don't remember. I didn't see all the episodes he was in because I kind of fell off with that show.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, he's in it at some point.
Oh, it's cool they bring him back. It's cool. I mean, we've discussed this before, but it's cool when they take like the minor characters that we don't see a lot of in the movies. You know, it's again, it's like with wrestling when you don't see enough of someone on Raw, but you see them get a 20-minute match on Main Event or one of the lesser shows or whatever, and you kind of get to see them showcase their skills a bit more. Kind of sounds like that's what the shows are for, you know, in regards to supplementing the programming that Marvel's putting out the movies. Was it just me, or did they tease a lot of sexual tension between Steve and Natalie? Not Natalie. Nat. What's her actual name? Black Widow.
Natasha.
Natasha. Well, I don't know why I wrote down Natalie in my notes here. That was a dumb.
Well, her name. Her fake name in Iron Man 2 is Natalie Rushman.
Oh, okay. Maybe that's what I was thinking of. All right. Natasha. What's up with the sexual tension here?
I don't know if that's something that they were planning on paying off or if they just felt like, oh, you have two good-looking people in a movie, they have to flirt a little. I don't know what the deal was with that, but to me it was pretty obvious that they weren't going to end up together.
I mean, she does make mention of how she wants to get Captain America a date. She wants to get Steve a date with the nurse, and they established that at the end of the movie. But then I know why they do it one time, but they kiss on the escalator, and they bring that back up again that he's not a good kisser while they're in the car, and then she kisses him again, I think, when she leaves him at the end of the movie. So it's like for two people that aren't going to end up together by the end of this movie, then why is there so much kissing going on? You know.
Well, the one on the escalator was a distraction.
Yeah.
And I think the one at the end was more like a friendship kind of thing. You know, it wasn't as romantic as I think some people might have thought it was.
Yeah. No, that makes sense.
But they already have like Agent Carter's niece in this. The nurse who's undercover,
yep.
his neighbor.
Mm-hmm. So
like. They were clearly planning for her to be his love interest, in which they even kind of pay off in Civil War with a kiss. But, then they changed their mind midway through and were like, oh, we're just going to send him back in time to be with Peggy. So you got to imagine, like, when he became an old man and met her as a little girl, like, that was super weird, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly. That's another thing I was going to ask you with Sharon. I think that's what her name is, Sharon Carter. She doesn't.
Yeah.
We'll get to it at some point. But does she die in Civil War? Because she's in the movie. Does she die there or no?
No.
Is she still a part of not? Yeah, she's still kind of with S.H.I.E.L.D., right? We just don't see her again after that. It's very possible that she showed up in Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., but I don't think so.
I do think that was probably the last time we saw her, but it wouldn't surprise me if they brought that character back just because she is one of the established S.H.I.E.L.D. agents. Like Maria Hill keeps popping up here and there. She could be another one of those down the line.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I hope so. She had a good character. It was cool to see her in this movie have much of a presence as she did. We also see the returns of Sitwell in this movie, who's been in Thor. He was in Avengers. He may have been in one other movie, but I know he was in those two. We mentioned it before. The Senator from Iron Man 2 also comes back, which is awesome. What were your thoughts on the returns of those characters kind of being not only brought back, but being revealed as the bad guys from within S.H.I.E.L.D.?
So the Sitwell reveal was cool to me. I liked that. But doesn't he get like hit by a truck or something?
Yeah, he gets just unceremoniously just gets chucked from the car by Winter Soldier and thrown in front of a truck, and that's the last time that we see him. It's kind of a weird death.
So the Russos did something on purpose. I don't know if you've discovered this in your research. That same truck shows up again in the movie later.
Does it really?
And it takes out another vehicle like that's pursuing Cap or something. And they put that in as like a little Easter egg because they intended it to be the Punisher driving that truck.
Oh, shit.
And they never connect it in the Punisher show, but I heard the directors in an interview talk about that, where they're like, yeah, there's a guy who kind of fancies a skull, and, he was the one driving the truck maybe. And, like, they really teased it out, and then nothing ever happened with it. But, like, in my mind, I like to think that it is Frank Castle in that truck, and that, like, he is helping behind the scenes.
That is awesome. I never knew that. Is that official canon, or just... Because if the directors are saying it, does that make it officially the Punisher in that scene, or no?
I mean, no. Marvel probably will never acknowledge it. I think the directors were just having a little bit of fun with it.
Okay.
But yeah, if you watch the movie closely, watch for that yellow truck, then you'll see it in another place.
Wow, that's awesome. And I'm just looking at the obvious Easter eggs, like when he shouts out, Stephen Strange, Sitwell does on the top of the roof. I didn't know about that. This is why I need you, Chris, to help me kind of fill in the blanks with all the MCU stuff, because you're literally, every time we talk, you're giving me new things I did not know about these movies, and now I want to go watch them for a third time to go, re-find all these things I missed. But what were your thoughts?
Well, that Easter egg doesn't really make much sense either, does it? Because at this point in the timeline, I don't think Stephen Strange had his powers yet, so why would they be watching him?
That's what I was going to ask you. So this is 2014. The movie doesn't take place until 2016. But, I mean, the whole thing about... I forgot what it was called. What's the whole project called? Not Paperclip. Where they whatever the thing is called, where they scout people that they think have potential, and then they'll kill them. What they call it something in this movie, and I completely forgot what it was. It's the whole thing at the end where they were going to kill everyone with the helicarriers, and then they destroy it. But I think the
whatever
what I mean?
The program was, I can't think of it.
I can't think of it, but you know what I'm talking about. So, well, they said that just because he wasn't, Doctor Strange yet, they did mention how even if someone, like, based off their SAT scores, for example, if they could be super smart, then they might be a threat. So he was probably a doctor at this point, I would imagine. Actually, he must have been, because the Ancient One, is that her name from Doctor Strange?
Yeah.
And so remember, she was in Endgame, and that took place in 2012 when they go back to that New York scene. And she's like, "Oh, if you're looking for Doctor Strange, he's performing practice down the street." And that was in 2012.
Yeah, but she mentions that you're like 5 years too early, which means if he didn't start his training until 5 years after the Avengers, wouldn't that have been a year after this movie took place then?
That would be a year... Well, 3 years, actually, because I think if this takes place in 2014, which is when it came out, 2017 would make sense because the movie came out in 2016, but they have that scene with Thor at the end, and Ragnarok, I think, is supposed to take place in 2017, so I guess it takes place in 2017. But the whole thing is that I think they kind of target people who have potential. Not just the fact that they're a superhero, but, like, he's a genius, whatever, so they must have calculated, like, oh, he may become a threat down the road, which is why they're targeting him. Of the other people that Sitwell mentioned, I've heard various theories, but do you know of anyone, like, they mentioned someone, another one, not Brooklyn, but, like, someone in New York, maybe that could have been Peter Parker. I don't know. But did you catch any obvious Easter eggs from that little spiel that he gave atop the roof, aside from Stephen Strange?
Other than Stephen Strange, I don't remember the list he rattled off. I think one of the names might have been just like one of the comic book writers as a little fun Easter egg. But,
okay.
Yeah, I don't remember which names he actually says right there.
Yeah, he said someone in like Cairo, Egypt. I didn't really think there was any obvious connection there to anyone like major from the MCU. Obviously, they do everything they do.
Oh yeah, there totally is.
Moon Knight. Yeah, they're there's definitely connections there. We just they do everything for a reason. So I'm sure there's some connections that I'm just not making. But again, you mentioned
Moon
earlier.
Knight's coming.
What'd you say?
Disney announced Moon Knight is a character in the comics who's super weird and awesome.
Oh, so that's the Cairo character.
He's probably the Egyptian guy that he mentioned.
There you go.
They're going to do a Disney Plus series for him at some point. I don't think it's been cast or even like written yet. They just announced that it's in development, and like some people call him Marvel's version of Batman, but he's just way more weird. You should look it up. He's a crazy character that I can't wait to see what they do with him.
I know I've heard of it. I think just because I think I heard they were doing a show about him, but they're making so many other shows right now. Like you said, it probably won't be for a couple of years, right? Probably.
At the very least, because they have 3 or 4 other shows planned, all these other movies, and God knows how long everything's getting delayed anyway. So, yeah, it'll be a couple of years before anything rock solid happens with that. But I do hope that he comes in at some point, because that character has the potential to be one of the more interesting Marvel movies.
Oh, interesting. Okay. Well, is it a movie or is it a show?
Well, I think they announced it as a show, but you never know. They changed their mind on this stuff, because originally Inhumans was going to be a movie, and then that ended up being a show, which was a miserable failure.
Yeah, good point. I'll look it up. I'll look it up when we're done here, because it sounds interesting. You mentioned the reveals earlier, how you kind of saw it coming, but for me, watching this movie for the first time 6 years ago when it came out in 2014, I was not as into the MCU now or then as I am now. So I didn't watch all the trailers. I really knew nothing about it. So when I saw, again, the Bucky reveal as the Winter Soldier, I thought that was cool. When they revealed that Hydra was a part of S.H.I.E.L.D. the entire time, I thought that was cool. When they had Black Widow take off her disguise when she was at the top of the in the conference room with Pierce, I thought that was cool. It felt like one swerve after another, nothing you could really see coming. As the movie kind of developed, it was one thing after another. What were your thoughts on all these reveals, even if you kind of saw some of them coming, some were more predictable than others? Did you feel it was too much or just the right amount?
Well, I think that's what they were intentionally going for, because a spy thriller typically has a lot of twists and turns, and that's what they wanted this movie to feel like. So I didn't feel like they overdid it, because some of them were major and some of them were minor. Like the whole Black Widow being the old lady in the disguise, like, that was a very minor reveal in comparison to Bucky.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, most definitely. I mean, yeah, some were more major than others, but they all served a purpose in the end. How much of the comics do you know really foreshadowed what went down in this movie? Not the trailers, but what happened in the comics.
I'm not very familiar with this storyline from the comics, but I know that like it follows the same basic outline with what happens with Bucky. He comes back brainwashed, Cap saves him, he becomes a good guy eventually.
Oh, okay. Okay. Well, yeah, speaking
so, like the bones of the story are there, but I know in the comics, like he wasn't just brought out to do assassinations. In the comics, he was one of the people who trains Black Widow.
Who, Winter Soldier?
Yes, and they even sort of hint at it a little bit in Civil War when she's fighting him and she looks him in the eye and goes, "Do you even remember me?"
Oh yeah, where else would she have said that from if it wasn't because he
throws her away, and they never address it again. And it's like just this weird little Easter egg of like people who know what they're talking about.
Do you think that might be acknowledged in her next movie at all, or no?
I doubt it, because I feel like at this point they would have brought it up if it was supposed to be part of the character's background. But you never know. Marvel may do something like that, and they may have her give an explanation in her own solo movie as to why she's never brought it up.
Interesting. I thought they may have been talking about this movie when she said that, but there's a whole other backstory to that hasn't even been explored yet, you're saying?
I think so, yeah, because I think she was talking about something more than just, don't you remember shooting at me? Like, don't you remember me? We know each other, you know?
Yeah, just not shooting at me for like 2 minutes at the end of this movie. A good point. The Captain America Bucky fight was great. Captain America Winter Soldier fight, I should say. On the helicarrier, Captain America kind of spares him, and then Bucky saves his life afterward because he does remember who he is, or he just knows that Steve remembers who he is. So that's why he saves him, because it's kind of that's what he did for him. What were your thoughts on that fight and how it kind of showed some real development with the character of Bucky/Winter Soldier as we kind of close out his chapter here?
I mean, it was a great way to end the movie, and then when they show him like going to research himself at the museum, I thought that was a good way of kind of indicating like this character is going to be back at some point and he probably will be a good guy. Mm-hmm. But yeah, that fight was great. It was really well done, and they acted it out really well too, because you can see like Steve being like, I don't want to fight you, I don't want to hurt you. If you feel like you have to kill me, then do it. But mm-hmm. Yeah, I felt like they did a good job, as we would say, selling that storyline.
Yeah, most definitely. It definitely packed a punch, no pun intended. It was just a great moment. It was a great scene. So a few minor things as we wind down here with a review of the movie. One thing I did want to ask you, when they show what everyone's up to at the end of the movie and what they're doing next and what they're moving on to, blah, 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 they show Bucky in the post-credit scene looking at his exhibit, so he's still out there, he's still looming, which is cool, left open-ended. Rumlow, same thing, they established that he's still alive, very, burnt and whatnot, and then we see him again in Civil War. So it's pretty obvious that the story will continue. This was merely a continuation of something bigger with Captain America, which is cool. It's left pretty open-ended. But you do see Maria Hill, who pops up in this movie to save, to help with Nick Fury, help with Captain America, so on and so forth. We see her at Stark Industries. What was the significance of that? I didn't really understand that.
Wait, I'm sorry, what about Stark Industries?
They showed Maria Hill sitting at Stark Industries. I didn't really understand what that was about.
She was interviewing for a job because she's out of a job now, because S.H.I.E.L.D's not a thing anymore.
Oh, okay.
And she is shown working for Stark in an episode of Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D.
Oh, really? So that's not, is that something they ever acknowledge again in the movies? I know we see her again in Endgame, or rather Infinity War, but do we see her again in the movies after this, in like that type of role, or no?
Was she in Civil War at all?
That's what I was thinking. I mean, I guess I'll rewatch it soon and I'll find out, but...
Yeah, I can't remember, but yeah, I know that was what it was a job interview, basically. And earlier in the movie, I think she had even referenced that they were trying to recruit her or something like that.
Oh, okay. Did not know that. That makes sense. I was wondering when I saw that scene what they were kind of alluding to. So at the end of the movie, they show Fury, they show his grave, and he's like, oh, if anyone ever needs me, just tell him I'm right here at the gravesite, whatever. When is it accepted? Like, when does it become public knowledge that Fury is still alive? Because the idea at the end of this movie amongst the public is that Nick Fury is dead. Did they ever establish publicly that he's still alive or no?
I don't know. I don't think it's very important. Mm-hmm. Honestly, because he's a spy, so he's probably not one of those people the public was super aware of anyway. Alexander Pierce was the face of S.H.I.E.L.D.
Okay.
So, yeah, I think it's one of those things where they're like, yeah, he's back, it's fine. Move on.
Yeah. Well, we don't really see much of him after this anyway.
They can't stop to explain everything, unfortunately. So they gotta skip over some small details and just let us fill in the blanks, I guess.
Yeah, for sure. I forgot that he was still technically declared dead by the end of this movie, but then we see him again in the very next movie amongst the other Avengers. As long as they know he's alive, I guess that's really all that matters. And then the final thing, so they show the post-credit scene, one of two. I already mentioned the Bucky one at the museum. But then they show the Scarlet Witch and her brother, whose name escapes me. What's her brother's name again? Quicksilver, right?
Peter or Pietro.
What would his superhero name?
Oh, Quicksilver.
Quicksilver, yeah. They show them. That obviously leads into Ultron a year later. So, again, this is something my mind I just forgot about completely, just erased. So they show the scepter. Wasn't the scepter with Thor at the end of Avengers 2 years earlier, or no?
Um,
I mean, that is the same
I
scepter,
mean,
right?
he
Or
had
no?
the Tesseract, but I don't remember specifically if he had the scepter in his hands too.
Yeah, because they get the scepter back. I think that's the whole thing at the beginning of Ultron, is when they get the scepter. That is the same scepter, right? Or am I just tripping here?
No, it's definitely Loki's scepter.
Okay, so wait a second. They don't bring the scepter back um to Thor's home planet, Asgard, at the end of Avengers, right? They just have the Tesseract. They just have Loki. Is it just
You
established
know
and
what?
they
It's
lose it?
probably. I think it's one of those things where there's a lot of shit that they clearly stole from Shield down in that bunker where they find the scepter, like the Chitauri, the big Chitauri creature that Stark sees hanging there. So I think maybe they're just implying that like Hydra has been stealing evidence and resources for a while, so that's something they stole as well.
Right. And they even say that too. They're like, "Oh, what happens if they find out that we've been working for Hydra?" Then he said it doesn't matter. So, yeah, I guess that would make sense. I remember reading that somewhere and I just completely forgot about it, but that would make sense. But yeah, overall thoughts on Captain America: The Winter Soldier and where it kind of falls in the MCU for you?
I mean, it's definitely in the top 5 to 7 movies for sure. It's really hard to actually rank the top movies just because they're all so wild, but this one's up there for me just because it's just as story driven as it is action driven, and it's more focused on just a handful of characters instead of the whole world.
Yeah, exactly. It's kind of about, and not just Captain America too. It's kind of a not an origin story, but it's as much about him as it is Black Widow and Nick Fury and Sam Wilson as Falcon and Bucky. You know, there's a lot of different moving parts here, and I think they do a great job of shining light on every single one of them. So it's not just a Captain America movie or just a Winter Soldier movie. I feel like it really succeeds in giving a lot of people just it gives you reasons to care about every character in this movie, which is tough when you have 4 or 5 different main players, you know.
Yeah, for sure. But they do a good job juggling it, and Marvel has clearly figured out how to service a lot of characters in a movie because Civil War and, all the Avengers movies seem to juggle those things pretty well, too.
And do you think that might be a Russo thing? Because I think this marked their debut as the directors, or rather the producers or whatever, for the MCU movies, and they came back for Civil War, Infinity War, Endgame, and all those movies have to juggle various characters. So do you think that might be something that the Russo brothers specifically mastered with this?
Maybe. It's also possible the writers, Marcus and McFeely, the two guys who wrote the screenplay, who also wrote parts of Infinity War and Endgame and Civil War. They did some work on Guardians of the Galaxy script. Like, they've been in the MCU for even longer than the Russos, technically.
Okay.
Like, I think they might have even written the script for the first Captain America, now that I think about it.
Oh, really?
Yeah, they did.
No,
yeah, they did. So, yeah, they're a writing duo who's been around for a little while. They did the Chronicles of Narnia movies. That's them, too. They wrote those.
Oh, really? How many of those movies did they make? 2 or 3 or something? Probably 3, right?
3 at least.
I know there were 7 or 8 books. I remember watching the first movie and liking it. I didn't catch the other ones, and then they just stopped. I thought they were going to make all the books, but they didn't.
Yeah, I saw the cartoon when I was a kid, and that was it.
And the cartoon one's good. That one's good too. That one's a classic. But anyway, this has been great, Chris. Next week we are talking, as you mentioned earlier, Guardians of the Galaxy, which is going to sound like deja vu because we've discussed it already. We discussed it for a separate podcast a couple of years ago. So we'll talk about that in the next one. And this has been great, Chris. People can follow you on the Twitter machine as always on at @BR_doctor. And we'll catch you then, Chris. Thanks as always.
All right, great. Thanks.
All right, awesome.